we will wait just about 3 minutes and get started. Welcome again, all. Thank you for joining us today. We're so happy to have you all here to have a conversation with our esteemed panelists on what it means to have a teacher pathway in the after-school world. I'm Ren Durayo. I am the co-director of Temescal Associates and the How Kids Learn Foundation. And I want to invite you to engage in the chat box and also where it says question and answers at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar or wherever your Zoom toolbar is. You can ask questions of the panelists in that box. That's helpful for us because we get to look just in one place without monitoring the chat. We are going to be sharing with you some basic information, a little bit of context about After School as Teacher Pathway. At first, I'd like to introduce my panelists. So today, we have with us Alea Rosario from Partnership for Children of Youth, Director of Programs there. Welcome, Alea. We have Eric Gurna, who is Senior Advisor at LA's Best. Welcome, Eric. We have Darielle Vigay, who just told me that she goes by Vigay. So welcome, Vigay, who is the Assistant Principal of Life Academy and Health and Bioscience in Oakland. And we have Sujan Han Harris, welcome, the Coordinator for Retention and Employee Development at Oakland Unified School. Welcome, panelists. Happy to have you here. I'm going to invite you to speak a little bit more about yourselves. Alea, would you say something about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Alea Rosario again, and I've been with the Partnership for Children and Youth just about going on 4 months. And before that, have been in various different roles in a capacity building or technical assistance kind of space supporting the out of school time field. And in particular, for the last probably 3 or so years, have had a pretty sharp focus on how to support and advance this expanded learning workforce in California. That's about 30,000 strong and growing. And so really looking at what are the strategies, the programs, the policies needed, and really honing in on this huge, incredible opportunity that I think is mostly untapped, but incredible potential to really kind of support those in the workforce that are interested in becoming teachers to pursue that pathway. So I've been doing a lot of exploring and listening and mining, for what works and what's needed in this space. And so looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Alea. Eric.
Hi, thank you, Ren, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm especially honored to be on the panel with 2 people who are working in the Oakland Unified School District because I'm a product of the Oakland Unified School District. I'm a graduate of Skyline High School. Should I say the year? I'm not ashamed, 1990. High school class in 1990 from Skyline. So I'm really glad to be here and I'm really excited about the topic. Just very little bit about me. I'm still getting used to my new title, which is Senior Advisor, because for the past about 6.5 years, I was President and CEO of LA's Best. And recently left that position because I moved out of California. And so am now supporting a leadership transition as we try to do that as thoughtfully as we can. And I'm really honored to be able to stay a part of the organization and support the current leadership and also support projects that I'm really passionate about, like our Teacher Pathway Project. My experience with this overall topic goes back really a couple decades. And I came into this with our recent foray into this with sort of some battle scars around the potential, the disconnect between the potential that we have here, which we're going to talk about today, and the reality of interfacing with the higher education system and the teacher credentialing system. And for those of you who are part of this webinar who are really from the youth development world, after school, expanded learning world, we don't deal with nearly the level of regulation and bureaucratic structure that you do to become a teacher in the regular instructional day. And a lot of times that interface, it needs a lot of love and attention in order to build this bridge between this huge potential and the reality. I'm really delighted that in the last couple of years, like Alea was talking about, there's been a lot of new attention paid to this, driven by both sort of demand and supply, which I know we're going to hear more about. My own passion for this really comes from the amazing workforce that is in expanded learning. As much as the research really points to, making a more diverse and multilingual teaching workforce, and those values are super important. What's less talked about, but equally important, is a community connected teaching workforce and a teaching workforce that really centers whole child approach to learning and has a really broad view of success for children to all find their own path. And I think that's what we bring from the after school world, in addition to the things that are more prevalent in the presentation and everything that we're going to hear. So I'm super excited about this and honored to be alongside these panelists and happy to be invited.
Thanks so much, Eric. Where did you move to?
Thanks for asking. I moved to Providence, Rhode Island.
Wow.
Just about as far as you can get from Los Angeles and still remain in the continental United States.
Wow.
So we're enjoying a lovely fall.
Thank you so much. Vigay.
Hello, everybody. My name is Vigay. I am assistant principal at Life Academy in Oakland. I started off as an after-school program instructor fresh out of college, and got to work in OUSD for a really long time. And then they launched their teacher pathway program. And so I'm a product of what we're talking about today, how to have these types of programs and get people through them. And it is a lot. It's a lot of work. And I've also supported other people in going through this process. And I think Oakland is a great example of what it looks like to utilize the folks in expanded learning time in a really positive way. And I think we're also going to help push California to change some of their policies, because I almost gave up in this process because of how much money I had to spend to do it. Even with OUSD supplementing a lot of things, they don't supplement if you fail the test. And in just the amount of time, like I almost ran out of time. So I definitely want to share more about like my experience on that, and hopefully we can support and get some policy change in California, so this pathway isn't so hard for folks.
Thank you so much, Vigay. Sujan.
Thank you, Ren. Good to be with everyone this morning. Sujan Han Harris. Let's see, I started in the district in 2002, started as a substitute teacher, and then discovered that really teaching was what I wanted to do. Felt like a calling at the time, and taught 4th and 5th grade. And I was in the classroom for about 13 years. And then I moved to central office initially to work with new teachers in the district. And now my work really is about developing teacher pathways and career pathways in the district. And I'm approaching really this work from more of a citywide lens. In the last 30 years in Oakland, there have been so many changes in the city. The cost of living is insane. I like to say that when I first moved to Oakland 30 years ago, that I was in a studio apartment that cost $385. And like that's unheard of now. You know, I sound like people I used to make fun of from earlier generations in my family. But and so just seeing how the cost of living has impacted the demographics of Oakland, and really seeing this as more of an effort to fight, and it's more of like an anti-gentrification effort, and also to really develop pathways for people who are here to have sustainable careers. So that's the lens with which I'm approaching this work. Let's see. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. It's just an honor to be here with you all.
Thank you so much. Rich backgrounds. I wondered if we could start with some terms and definition to frame this conversation a little bit. And I'm going to ask Leah, would you mind reading the first 2 terms and definitions we have here?
Sure. So teacher shortage is typically defined as the inability to fill vacancies at current wages with individuals that are qualified to teach in the fields needed. So using this definition, some states are clearly experiencing high rates of shortages. I think from what I've read, it's a nationwide crisis. And maybe what I'll add is that that was pre-pandemic. And the teacher shortage, I guess, is even more exacerbated and nuanced, I think. In terms of grow your own programs, these are programs that are designed to recruit, develop, and retain teachers who are already in the community. It draws from people who are connected to the school or the community and may not have considered teaching, or who need or want additional support to enter the profession.
Thank you. Eric, you want to read the next 2?
Sure. Teacher pipelines and pathways are often developed to attract teaching candidates and address the teacher shortage. Sometimes they're also focused on retention of teachers. Teacher residency programs typically are an alternative pathway to teaching for prospective educators who already have a bachelor's degree. In the teacher residency model, teachers to be integrate master's level education content with a year-long classroom internship in a public school. And I'll just do a little editorializing here. In this project that we just did at LA's Best with Alea in her former position and a couple of other organizations, we were looking at teacher residency programs and sort of wanting to question this idea, like, does it always have to be that they already have a bachelor's degree? Or is there a way to adapt this idea to provide more access to those who are on their path, but need some more support along the way to be able to even just get that first step of the bachelor's degree and also the teaching credential.
Thanks. So as you look at these terms and definitions, panelists, is anything missing that we need to add here as we frame this conversation?
I would say that the teacher residency program, what a wonderful way to actually get prepared. And I think that it's shown that people who are better prepared through such a program tend to stay longer in the classroom. And unfortunately, more and more teachers, especially in Oakland, who need to make a living, who need to continue to draw down a salary, they're not able to take advantage of residency programs because it's really unpaid. Unless you're lucky enough to have certain funding. And so we've been seeing a lot more teachers entering through the intern credential pathway, which means you're working full-time while you are going to school. So it's just one of many pathway options. I just wanted to name that.
Yeah. So we want to expand our definition of pathway beyond residency. Thank you.
I would also just add that one of the things we've looked at in LA is the existing paraprofessional career ladders. And so that's something we can really learn from in expanded learning, because paraprofessionals have a lot in common with expanded learning staff. And in fact, sometimes some of our staff are also paraprofessionals or have been or will be. So really looking at the work that's already been done to support paraprofessionals, teaching assistants and learning aides and whatever the titles are in your district, to be able to become classroom teachers, we could also utilize those same mechanisms.
Thanks.
Yeah, and something I also related around the pipelines and pathways is that there are several points along someone's journey to become a credentialed teacher in after school or out of school time that are available. So even, a career exploration, right, in education careers can start as young as whatever, preschool, if we want to say, but really kind of looking at those points that include, high school, dual enrollment, again, career internship and exploration, while someone is maybe attending community college, earning their AA, their BA, and then of course their credentialing program. So I think recognizing the pipelines and pathways programs can meet kind of, or should be designed to meet those, specific needs along someone's journey.
Thank you. Let's look at some advantages that out-of-school time workers bring to teaching. Vigay, would you read the first couple?
Yep. One, the knowledge and skills that OST workers gain is very similar to those required of teachers. Expertise in social emotional learning, training in trauma-informed practices, classroom management experience, designs activities for students with diverse learning needs, practices child and youth development principles, engages families. They're also, number two, are commonly from the same communities as the students and bring in a unique understanding of the communities that their young people reside in.
Thank you. And Sujan, would you read the last couple?
Sure. Many OST workers are people of color. Many OST workers are interested in a teaching career. Most OST programs are designed around program standards that are very similar to those for K-12 classroom education.
All right, panelists, what do you think of these advantages, and are we missing some?
I think these are spot on. When I entered the classroom, a lot of teachers were like, "Oh, you don't seem like a first year teacher." And these are like teachers who have been around 3, 4, 5 years, right? And I think a big part of that was at my particular site where classroom management is a challenge. I had a ton of classroom management experience. I mean, come on, it's after school. It's like, no, you can't go to the snack. You can't go to the store. No, you can't go to the gas station, and stay over here, and like, don't hit each other, and don't run in this part of the field. And so there's so many like structures and routines that had to be set up to like manage the entire program, that managing a classroom was like a piece of cake for me. And so that made me a huge asset at a site where behavior in classroom management was like the barrier for many of the teachers. And then I think there's also the thing that I think is missing here is when I was in OST, we were doing the YPQA, and it was really big on certain youth practices around like and SEL practices, but like explicitly like how we're opening program, how we're engaging student young people in dialogue. So I could play a game of Pictionary and turn that into a whole debrief about how we like to communicate and receive information. And other teachers could not understand like how I was connecting Pictionary to getting information about my students. And that came from after school. Like we took such a strong stance on debrief and how to have a strong debrief that I could turn any fun game into an opportunity to get information about my students.
Thank you. Anybody else see any advantages missing or have any comments on these advantages?
I would love to just underscore something that Vigay raised, which is that there are some skills that can't easily be taught. And so it's interesting that I think one of the strongest assets that many after-school program employees bring to the classroom is that connection, building rapport with students and families, which has so much to do with what we call classroom management. And often the greater narrative is that people who are coming out of traditional credentialing programs are the most prepared, but we see so many people actually burn out, even though they've been fully prepared on the academic aspect of it. We've seen them burn out because the classroom community building and the classroom management is such a struggle for them. And so there are some skills that that people from the after school program are bringing in that just can't be taught. And then the rest can be taught, you know, like everything that you learn through a credentialing program. And I just think that asset is worth highlighting as being so instrumental.
Thanks.
I just want to agree with and co-sign everything that both of you just said and add that I think passion and dedication, especially to teaching as social justice, teaching as equity, is an advantage that OST workers bring. And I'm always hesitant because I don't want to be like pitting after school expanded learning against the regular school day in any way. But I do also want to be real and say that to really oversimplify it, I think there's two types of teachers. There's teachers who come into it with passion for children, for learning, for community growth, for social justice, for whatever, just passion. And there are teachers who picked it as a solid, stable career path that offered some advantages. And I think we want more of the ones with passion. We want, you know, the majority to be the ones that are passionate. And I think that a larger percentage of potential teachers that come out of OST are those passionate educators.
Thanks, Eric. Alea, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I also would just underscore everything that everyone has said, and also just name that part of the project that I worked on with the California After School Network and Eric, and I saw Rosa in the attendee list. So I have to shout out to Rosa from Glenn Price Group, who actually did this crosswalk of the California teaching performance expectations. So the TPEs did a crosswalk with the expanded learning like competencies, a couple of different competency descriptions. And of course, there was great alignment, and the experience working with families and family engagement was a really strong, like, clear line. And I think Sujan, spoke to it, right? That like working and engaging and interacting with families is something that probably most teacher preparation programs don't do very well or don't have the opportunity to do. And so that's a really clear, direct experience that people who work in OST have. And then that, I think, Eric, to your last point, the way that I like to think about this is like, what are the advantages of work in out of school time that prepares you for teaching? Because we can also look at, what we have seen during summer learning programs, for instance, where teachers, classified credentialed teachers, are working in an expanded learning setting, right, or a summer learning setting, and their passion gets reignited, right, because they get to teach in the creative ways to build community. They have time and space. And so, to even think about how overall experience working in an out of school time setting, brings advantage to a teacher, might be an interesting way to think about this.
Thank you, Alea. I'm noticing in chat, I missed this. I think it's Zaya Vera. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. Has a comment about a teacher residency program that typically attract more BIPOC educators than traditional pathways, and says that most teacher residency programs are paid. In OTR, I don't know what OTR stands for. They have a $15,000 stipend plus $10,000 for Black educators. And all Oakland teacher residents have access to housing support, either a studio or $500 monthly housing stipend. Thank you, Zaya, for piping in.
Zaya is actually a part of our
Yeah.
our team, and that's the Oakland Teacher Residency. And I appreciate that she lifted up the ways that our Oakland Teacher Residency actually is funded and supportive for candidates.
Thank you. Okay, so lots of advantages that out of school times workers can bring to teaching, and also ways in which the out of school time can re-engage latent passions of teachers who have been working a long time in a school setting. Thanks for lifting that up. And here we have teachers of colors. Why is this important? What is research telling us about teachers of color? Alea, I'll go back to you.
Sure. So the research tells us that teachers of color boost the academic performance of students of color, including improved reading and math test scores. They show improved graduation rates. They inspire aspirations to attend college. Students of color and white students have more positive perceptions of their teachers of color, including feeling cared for and academically challenged, and that a greater diversity of teachers may mitigate feelings of isolation, frustration, and fatigue that could contribute to individual teachers of color leaving the profession when they feel that they are alone.
And this research comes from the Learning Policy Institute, from a paper called Teachers of Color in High Demand and Short Supply. So what else do we know about why teachers of color are important?
I can speak on my experience as a teacher in East Oakland. I grew up in Oakland. Like, I was all USD student in West Oakland. A lot of my students at the time, like, I knew their families. I knew somebody. Sometimes I found out I was related to students. So you have this connection in terms of like community similarities and cultural similarities, and that can impact that social emotional support that you can provide to students. Even at my new site where I'm really new and we have very, very few Black students, like, I'm able to connect with families in a different way and open up comfort level, especially as we're talking about like vaccine mandates and things like that. Like, there's this feeling of understanding when you talk to someone of the same cultural background that I think opens the door and can allow you to open that student's mind to like other teachers as well, right? Because if you're only in my house, in my community, I only engage with Black folks. So when I went to school and had to encounter folks of other races, it was just like uncomfortable. And so a lot of my Black teachers opened the door for me to feel comfortable to talk to other teachers, because then you realize that like, oh, they're just people who have like the same life and lived experiences or different lived experiences, but like we have similarities, and sometimes you just need someone to like open that door for you.
Thanks. Other comments about why teachers of color are important?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, it was a couple of years ago when I was prompted to think about this, that I didn't have a teacher of color until, I mean, I think they were like a substitute maybe in middle school that I remember. And I didn't have any Black educators until I had the opportunity to go to college. And one until I moved to San Francisco. And so, you know, as Vigay just said, right, this idea of like exposure, right, and openness, and how do you learn that when none of your educators who are, you know, have such an impact on someone growing up don't look like you, or you know, you can't identify and relate to at all. And I know that reflecting back on that, that definitely had an impact on my confidence, you know, in learning, in my comfortability to ask for help. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel, you know, like I could ask for help even through college. And so, you know, just this idea that all students benefit from having teachers and educators of color is just incredibly important. And I think the other piece that is important for us to think about is then how teachers of color are supported and intentionally, you know, given the skills, the confidence, the tools, the support to be effective educators for the long run, because we also know that educators of color turn over at a higher rate than their white peers. And so for us to think about not only, you know, how important and critical teachers of color are, but how we are investing in their preparation and support once they're in those positions.
Thanks so much, Alea. Sujan, I imagine you have a perspective on that topic, specifically supporting teachers of color in an ongoing manner.
Yeah, the work of our team, I would say, really focuses on, yes, ultimately, what are the outcomes for students and students of color? But our work kind of takes a step back and looks at really what are the experiences of teachers of color in the district, and what are the push-pull factors that are impacting their desire to stay and their sustainability. And also just seeing a lot of parallels in terms of access for both, like that students of color have that are being replicated for teachers of color. And so seeing those systemic parallel pathways and trying to address those. And I loved the importance of teachers of color, and how do you have critical mass of teachers of color so that teachers of color aren't tokenized for those strengths that they bring to a school site or to the classroom, and are isolated in that way as well.
Thanks. So that's a little bit of the context as we continue on with this conversation. And I think the first question I have, and anyone can start, is as you think about after school workers and a movement towards becoming a teacher into the education system, what is your vision? What potential do you see? What are you specifically working on? It's a very broad question. You can enter. I want to invite you to enter in at any place. Who would like to start? Either what your program entails or how you're thinking about it, a vision that you have. Where do you enter in?
feel like we're in a showdown. You need to call on us because we're just not willing to go. I'll start because I just couldn't take the awkwardness of none of us
Thank you.
talking for those few seconds. Well, and I'll try to be brief because it's such a broad thing and so important. So many different aspects of it. At LA's Best, we have long. Well, let me just say very quickly, LA's Best is an after-school program that's in close to 200 elementary schools in Los Angeles. We are a partnership of the city, the school district, and the private sector. And so we're both a nonprofit and we're a district program, and we're part of the mayor's office. So we have a lot of stakeholders, a lot of supporters, and a lot of complicated systems to interface with. We serve at least in pre-COVID times, we served 25,000 children and, like I said, close to 200 schools. And at our full capacity, we're at about 2,000 staff. As most of you, I'm sure, know, the whole field is facing a huge staffing shortage right now. So we're not at 2,000 staff right now, unfortunately. But we know from the staff surveys and everything that we do that a large percentage of our staff want to become teachers. We don't have the data to show how many of them do actually become teachers, and we don't have anything currently in place to really support their efforts. But over the years, we've been both like excited and frustrated, excited by the potential that we see and frustrated by feeling a little bit like overwhelmed and like there's not much that we can do about it, which is why I'm so excited about the recent work that we've been doing. We know that, like Vigay was saying, like teachers who get their sort of initial work with children done in after school just have like magic that they bring to the classroom. I mean, I remember visiting a classroom as I was there for LA's Best, and this wasn't an after school program. I was just visiting a regular school day classroom, and I was seeing the room setup was totally different. They were set up in stations, and it was this whole experiential learning cycle model. And it was a third grade classroom, and I was so impressed by how this teacher was doing things quite differently than you see in a typical district classroom. And especially for third grade and up, you know, where we start to see more of a buckle down kind of approach. And the principal was really supportive. And I was talking to the principal about not why did he allow that, but like, how did he feel comfortable with this different model? And he was saying, because the teacher has this whole methodology behind it. She can give this framework. She can explain to you how she's getting to the standards and the skills and competencies, but in this more experiential way. And then I met the teacher, and she had worked for years in after school and completely credited her experience in after school with, when you combine that lived experience that Vigay was talking about with the formal training of university teacher education program, and also the professional development that the district provides, you get, in the best of cases, you get that sort of magical youth development classroom. And so when we see situations like that, we're like, okay, we've got 2,000 staff, a huge, like 40% of them or 50% of them want to become teachers. How do we get more of this? Like, we want to see more of this happening, because most of us who are working in expanded learning, we're not doing this because we're dedicated to the hours between 3 and 6, or it's not like we love a certain time of day or a certain time of the year. We're in this because we want to see communities of children thrive, right? And be able to collaborate in their education, find joy in their learning, and open up, all the choices that are available to them, that should be available to them in their world. And so how do we make more of that? And so then the idea is, well, I guess we get more of our staff to become teachers. Now, I'll say sort of parenthetically, in today's staffing shortage in the expanded learning world, this conversation is a little bit fraught, because we're talking about a pathway out of expanded learning, and we're so focused right now on getting people into it. But I think that they're not contradictory, because if we can make expanded learning a place where you can go to have this wonderful experience that'll also lead you to this larger career that you want, or you can stay in expanded learning or do a million other things, that can actually be an attraction. So the idea then is, how do we build supports? How do we build a program or a system within our organization to not just accommodate, but support those staff members who want to become teachers and help them navigate through a very complicated system that sometimes seems like it's set up to weed people out rather than set up to help people succeed. And I was delighted to see what was in the chat about all the supports that are there with the teaching residency in Oakland, because those are the kinds of things that we need to help people who may be first-time college students, who may not have people in their family who have become teachers, may not have people in their social networks who have become teachers, to have the same assets and supports that people who are in multi-generational college and maybe teaching families have. And so we're just in the exploratory stage where we're just taking a look at what they're doing in Fresno at the California Teaching Fellows, what they're doing statewide. What does a teaching residency look like? How can we connect with the larger field and develop a laboratory for making the most of an experience working in expanded learning? And so we don't yet have programs, and it's hard to make them right now because we're so focused. We're in a triage mode, like everybody is in this crisis, ongoing crisis, that it's like we don't have time for a lot of things that feel extra or special because we're just focused on getting people, in ratio in programs at sites and dealing with these new funding streams, et cetera. But we're still committed to our vision, which is slowly but surely, intentionally, thoughtfully building out a system where anybody who's working for LA's Best who wants to become a teacher can sign up and keep working at LA's Best, but also get all these resources and skills and leverage the work that they're doing so that it's recognized as professional development, it's recognized as on-the-job training, field experience, and translate that into a teaching career if that's what they want.
So thanks, Eric. That's really, it's really helpful to know on the community side, how you are looking at it and how you're looking at having to make connections. And Sujan, you're on the inside with one of these programs. What's it look like from your perspective?
I'm sitting here there was so much in what you said, Eric. Also, you're just deepening my own understanding. I was never part of an after-school program. And so while we had partnerships with the after-school program at the site where I taught, you're just really deepening my understanding. You're making me reflect on what it was like being a classroom teacher. And there's just so much pressure on classroom teachers to meet standards, there's testing, there's just a lot of other structural factors that really can sometimes force teachers to work within a more structured or rigid process or system. And I'm just appreciating how in the after school program, you get to work with students in a totally out of the box kind of way and get practice with that. And then you can bring that to the classroom. I think Vigay, you were speaking about that earlier as well. So thank you just for expanding my own understanding of that. The other thing that you said, Eric, that really stood out to me was, we did a presentation a few years ago to after school program leaders about creating more intentional partnerships so that people in the after school could come, explore their career desires in the district. And one of the things that we had to be very sensitive to is this idea that, the after school programs are also looking for employees. Is the district leaching employees out? And so it kind of forced us to look at what's the actual data, what's the career lifespan of somebody in an after school program at the different levels, and where is the natural, what's the natural or typical time span of somebody who works in an after school program. In Oakland, it's impossible to be a line worker. I think that's the name of the position in OUSD, and have a sustainable, have that sustain, you get rent and, making ends meet. And so I feel like there's an opportunity here for collaboration that excites me when I think about it. So I just want to calm down so I can really articulate this. But I've been holding this idea, what if after school programs were almost reframed as teacher laboratories, right? And so it would be mutually beneficial for the school site because they would they would be able to incorporate people in the after school program as more of a holistic part of the school community. They could be connected to teachers at the school site who could act as mentors. And it would be a great selling point for after school programs to be able to say, you know, after school program is like a step towards a teaching career. And I have to say, maybe about 65% of those we've had through our programs have actually are continuing to work through their credential pathway or have graduated. So the percent of people who actually dropped out of the after school pathway, I don't necessarily see that as a failure on the part, but it's also a process where people get to find out, is teaching for me? And I think that's a really important thing to assess, because, you know, if teaching isn't for you, teaching is hard enough as it is, if you don't absolutely love it. And so that's something important to find out as well. Anyway, I'm digressing. My point being that I think that there's an opportunity for deep collaboration and really like teacher laboratory, setting up hub sites that could turn actually the school culture around and also really make that after school program attractive to potential employees who want to explore their teaching options. I'll stop there.
And I can build on that. At Elmhurst United, I think we did that. So I would have been considered a dropout of the teacher pathway program with OUSD because I actually did. Like I started the first year, I took on a position at my site when I should not have. Like they explicitly told principals, don't hire people in the program because we want them to go through the program, and my principal hired me. And then I didn't start my credentialing program when I was supposed to. So technically I was a dropout from the pipeline, but I still ended up going through with the process. And what we did at our site was and the reason I did that is because I wanted to be at that school. I know what it's like to work in Oakland. I know what it's like to be a student in Oakland. And I didn't want my teaching experience to start at any other site. I wanted to be at that school. And that's because that school had a system in place where my principal knew that I wanted to enter teaching before I even started the program. He had support set up, and when a teacher quit mid-year, he was like, this is our opportunity to hire you. I had coaching every single week. I had the opportunity to observe other teachers. There's another person at my site who was an after-school AmeriCorps member who we got hired as a para, who also works in after school and is almost done with his BA and is going to be able to go into a credentialing program. And so this is years, it's 5 years later, but we kept him engaged in the school and in the culture. And so when this person eventually becomes a teacher, you know, he'll have a host of experiences within our site. He also will have an understanding of how to use his experience to be placed in the right spot on the salary schedule, so that it's right now we're struggling, but once you get there, it's going to be a huge jump. And so we have this way to really hold people at Elmhurst through and it creates an amazing culture, because you have people who are paras and been in after school program for 5 years who will eventually become a teacher there. And so I think those things are possible, but it just we have to message the amount of work it is, because you can't survive off just a para salary or just an after school salary. So a lot of times we try and get people who are after school workers who want to be teachers to also be paras. So that way you have you're at one site all day, and whenever possible, you can take classes online. They might leave early certain days from after school to do classes, and then showing them the salary schedule and explaining that in 4 years, with all of this work you have, you'll be able to hop in here, and just really continuing to support them in that messaging so that they can enter these programs. And so I think for me, in terms of what is my vision for my work, is what helped me step outside. What helped me is I had great coaching, and it was a hard decision to leave the classroom, but that's what kept me as a Black educator. I had a Black coach. I had administrators who were Black, and I want to be that for other teachers. I know I'm going to work in OUSD for the rest of my career. And so if I can pull other people into this district because they can see me as a support, there's just one me, but if I could pull in 20 Black teachers that are going to stay here for 5 to 10 years, that can have a larger impact. So that's kind of like what I'm trying to do. And Oakland is super supportive. Like I'm a teacher on special assignment who's functioning as an assistant principal because there was a need at a site. I had the skill to fill that need, and I'm getting support from the district to like go through this process to get my admin credential, right? And so I am also the head person at my school supporting all of our teachers who are uncredentialed understand the process because I just went through it. So I'm like, you can do this. And did you know that we have folks who can help you with tutoring? Like they don't know that things exist because like an email is impersonal. So when I'm like, no, we can get you a tutor, we can get you this, and you can sign up for that program. And so I'm also able to like keep our teachers engaged who are on emergency credentials or who are intern teachers or like who are in the midst of doing their Cal TPA, which I just did last year. And so I'm able to like support people staying. And that's what I see as like my role in these next couple of years is like really keeping people who are unsure engaged, and then also going into our after school and seeing like, hey, who wants to be a teacher? Let's talk about what you need to do and let's get you in the right places so that when you do get your credential, you can come in on step 5 and not step 1.
Thank you. So go ahead, Alea.
I mean, Sujan, let's talk. And Begay, what you just described is exactly what we want to see in all of the after school programs across the state. And, you know, and that's the big imaginative vision, right? Is that there are over 4,500 after school programs across the state. Imagine if every one of those programs supported 1 to 2 teachers, right? In that way, like this is exactly what we know the potential is. And so, hearing this is just super exciting and we want to highlight and lift up, you know, how these partnerships need to work together. And I think there's a question in the chat, right, around the partnerships and how does higher ed, the institutions of higher ed need to be involved in this. And so what I wanted to offer was part of the work that we just wrapped up exploring. I'm going to put the report in the chat is this residency model, because we know the benefits of the model and the intensive rigor in terms of preparing folks, as well as, you know, the outcomes for candidates of color, is looking at this residency model and also looking at an apprenticeship model. And there's a lot of alignment. And what I think is the interesting thing about the apprenticeship model is that you are earning while you're learning, essentially. So you're earning a wage versus a stipend. It will take a lot of coordination, I think, as was just described, but to really think about how work in after school is a part of clinical experience and is recognized. Work experience in after school is recognized as some of that clinical experience. Eric, you said this when early on we were talking that the partnerships really need to be authentic, right? And like in that, institutions of higher ed need to be able to schedule their coursework so that people can continue to work in after school, right? And the California Teaching Fellows Foundation, I mean, they've been saying that message for years now, right? That like, to really seize this opportunity, that kind of partnership needs to be in place, right? Where the institutions of higher ed, the school districts, the after school programs need to be co-designing these models and programs together, so that someone could be taking coursework, potentially working as a para, right, during the day, continue to be able to work in the after school program, earn their wage, access additional, funding that's available to support teachers or teacher candidates, and that all of those partners have committed to that. And I think this coordination piece, so like the role that you're playing, Begay, and like ushering new educators along their pathway, I think is something really interesting that especially right now, districts and LEAs are absolutely tapped, right, in all of the things that need to be coordinated. But I just want to highlight, right, that piece is really critical as well. Who is tracking, who is on their pathway, and how far are they, and where are they struggling, and where do we need to bring in supports, whether it's transportation support or childcare, or whatever it is. That coordination piece seems really, really critical to think about. And that, yeah, I mean, this teacher laboratory idea is just really exciting to think about, and something that I hope we can sort of pilot in some areas in the next couple of years. I was part of a group and led a committee that developed apprenticeship standards. And really it's defining the work processes, right? Like, if you are the employer, what is your role in hosting apprenticeships, right? What is the higher ed role in terms of offering coursework and aligning potential certificates to building the competencies that someone needs? And piloting this sort of apprenticeship as a sort of early on in the pathway to becoming a teacher, right? So if someone is able to continue their education, earn a wage that gets them to, some kind of like step in their salary and step in a position that might then, the next step up, the next position might be to enter a residency program or a teacher preparation program, like that kind of apprenticeship pathway or comprehensive pathway, because it doesn't necessarily have to be capital A apprenticeship. But that kind of full, holistic, whole human kind of experience is exactly what I think will best prepare and best usher in highly qualified, youth development centered, equity centered teachers of color. So that's kind of the work that we are exploring, and that what we get excited about. And the last thing I'll add to this point is that there's going to be even a greater need for this, given the universal transitional kindergarten and preschool, right? So like an existing teacher shortage, we're going to be in even more dire position over the next couple of years as we need to bring on more preschool and TK teachers. And I think this idea of looking at requirements, right, credentialing requirements, access to additional funding to support someone going through their credentialing process definitely needs to be looked at. And and for us all as the different partners sitting around the table trying to figure this out, to figure out what are the policy needs and the policy asks as well, to make those pathways accessible and these jobs accessible to people, will be really important, and something that the partnership is definitely looking at.
You're muted, Sujan.
Sorry, I make comments to myself as people talk, because I'm in agreement. And Aaliyah, I love something that you said made me think about the site where I used to work at. We had a critical mass of student teachers coming into the site. And what that did was it forced the veteran teachers at the site to actually continually examine their own practice. And the student teachers were bringing in fresh ideas from, that's kind of going on in the field of education. And so it kind of it not only acted as a retention strategy for veteran teachers because they were keeping their own practice alive, but it was also a way to really keep the curriculum and approaches from becoming stagnant. And so it'd be awesome to borrow from that experience and kind of transfer that in a laboratory site kind of way. Also appreciated what you said about the partnerships in our After School to Teacher Pathway program. We partnered with a credentialing program that was very agile, and they were willing to come. They sent representatives to come and speak directly to the people on the pathway. They would take them through the application process. So much of becoming a teacher is really demystifying and clarifying the massive amount of information out there about how to actually navigate that process. And so having partnerships with the credential program that's willing to really slow it down, and work with the people at the table, and not always stick by the deadlines and the rules, support with FAFSA, all of those pieces have to be in place. So that's definitely work that we need to do, identifying those IHEs. We're also finding that a huge barrier is actually getting your bachelor's degree. So one area that I feel like we could do a lot more work around is really identifying four-year institutions that are agile enough to actually have programs that are accessible and that would make it easier then after you go through the program. Maybe you could take courses for your bachelor's that would make it easier then to get your teaching credential later on. But like, where are those programs? And those are conversations that we've started having. We have a long way to go. But really the BA is, I think, just a huge barrier.
Thank you so much. There was a question about not only the teacher laboratory, but around funding. Now I can't find it. Oh, what types of university partnerships or contracts does an extended learning program need to build or have this teacher laboratory work? That's from IO. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm going to ask the folks, the participants, if you could put literal questions, not in the chat, but in the question and answer pod. It helps us keep track of them a little bit better. And I can also open up your mic and have you actually speak to us. So do we know the answer to that? What kinds of partnerships or contracts?
Agile ones.
Agile ones.
I love that word. And I think that to some degree, we've spoken about this in broad terms, but like the agility or flexibility that we require especially in higher education partners in expanded learning, I feel like it's a level of agility and flexibility that most of them have not dealt with before. And I'm really happy to hear that, Sujan, you've dealt with, like, you would consider them to be agile, because in my experience, it's like, we're dealing with the individuals at those schools of education that are the broadest thinkers, the most expansive. They can have the imagination to see that if we build the bridge, that there's a great potential here. But still behind them is this, 150-year-old institution that has very rigid requirements, prerequisites, et cetera. And so my frustration in the past has been that potential partners talk a good talk about how flexible they're going to be, but then when it comes to like real things, like Alea was referring to around like scheduling of a class or prerequisites, or things that aren't just about this, but they're part of their larger system. So they got to get approvals from all these different places, and they have to really become advocates for change within their system. And I think activism and advocacy can take on a romantic sort of notion when you're a little bit further away from it because you're fighting for justice, and you are. But a lot of times that gets very wonky. You have to be fighting for something that you've got to explain a million times over and over and over again. We find this with our own expanded learning advocacy in Sacramento. Like, after school programs for all kids sounds great, but when it comes to adjusting the daily rate of this one funding source in order to keep up with the cost of operating the program based on increasing costs from the minimum wage movement, like, is anyone even still paying attention? Like, it's just really like detailed micro policy stuff, but that's where real change gets made. And so I think that it requires a dedication. It requires finding unusual, passionate people on both sides of those partnerships who are going to really stick with really getting those changes made, and really being able to have the evidence to make the case of why this is important, keeping the big vision alive, and then figuring out how to tinker with and adjust the micro sort of aspects of it to make it even possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in my experience, community colleges have been willing, right, to be in conversation and to really understand how, and I sort of let them do the tinkering and the bending or flexing of rules, right? But this idea of finding a champion who gets the opportunity, right, gets the vision that's possible, can be a really great champion in terms of, again, pushing the boundaries or pressing against rigid kind of rules that institutions of higher ed are faced with. And in California, I think over 25 of the 115 community colleges have a teacher preparation program, and that's growing. And so that's a really great start, is to find out, do your local community colleges have that teacher preparation kind of coordinating body or people, and I can help people get in touch with with their community college if you're interested. And it's been over the last year that I've kind of just got connected and been a part of their meetings, and they are some of the most creative, like down to flex people. And I don't have to worry about what are all of the rules, right? We come together and we say, here's the vision, here's the opportunity. And I let them go figure out what additional funding might be available for these students, how they can work, to, again, develop a certificate that meets the needs, that meets the needs of employers, so they understand what do after school program providers need in terms of requirements, skills, competencies, and then what are the needs of students. I mean, community college faculty in particular are very in tune with the needs and the types of supports that their students need access to. And so from the community college angle, they have just proven to be a really sort of willing partner, and might be a good partner to start with, especially as we're still dealing with this BA requirement. We know that we need kind of highly effective community college AA programs that can really connect folks directly to earning their BA and then continuing on in their path to becoming a teacher.
So in terms of partnerships, I would say just making sure that whatever university you have a partnership with, that is directly connected to the school district, and that there is a point person in that university and a point person in the district, and that they understand all the functionality. So for example, when Oakland got a grant from Salesforce to fund teacher programs, right? It came through in the summer. I had already signed my contract for my school. I sent them an email and was like, hey, OUSD just got this funding. I know I already paid my tuition, but I might be able to get it paid for. They knew exactly who to send the invoice to the point that before my principal even got the money, they had already paid for me. And so those types of relationships, I didn't have to go through the bureaucracy of the university, because the university knew who to contact in my district. And then they refunded me my money and I was able to pay for the next year. So having strong relationships like that just makes it a lot easier for the people in the program when there's understanding on both sides on how the logistics work. And then I would say for charter networks, to just be realistic in your contracts, okay? Because a lot of charter schools are doing things like saying they'll pay for parts of program, but then reducing salary and requiring people to stay for X amount of years, but then they're not actually supporting those people to want to stay. There is a particular charter network in Oakland who had folks in my program, and all of the people in my program who worked at that school no longer work there and no longer teach in Oakland, because they had such a bad relationship with that school and the contracts, and the fact that people right down the street in Oakland didn't have to take less salary for. So it's just as a charter, be aware of what's happening around you so that you're not manipulating the folks in your program and explaining to them the expectations, right? And so just as a charter network, be really aware of what's happening so you're not pushing people out of education for any particular reason. Really hold on to your Black and brown teachers because literally all of them left. I got you, Sarah. I tried to send a couple of them our way, trust me. But I would say, yeah, just like having those partnerships is really key. And like you were saying, like community colleges are really, really, really underutilized in California. And I would say like down to meeting with your after school folks and like looking at the catalog and identifying what classes fit with their schedule and like supporting them through the logistics of managing such a crazy schedule, and then supporting them in building in personal time. So like teachers I coach, I'm like, let's map out your personal time for the quarter so that you already have planned days to not like to have mental health days. And so like being a like holistic support is really important.
Thanks so much. Before we open it up to questions from folks out there in the internet land, is there anything else you want to tell us about what you're thinking about your experience or your particular programs? And Sujan, I see you have your mic unmuted.
If I could just say one comment about the IHEs. I was recently part of an advisory group to the state Department of Education around teacher diversity. And one of the findings that came up out of that work was the modernization of teacher preparation programs. And I think, Eric, you were right on when you said we're looking at historical institutions that have historically been very rooted in a very certain, dare I say, mainstream white supremacist paradigm, and like really being responsive to the needs of teachers and teachers of color now. It's going to take a huge shift. And what we've been finding is that we've had enough complaints from our teachers of color about particular institutions that have kind of forced us to look at, like, how do we get that message across and support? How do we get that information to them? So I just want to shout out to Sarah Glassband, who actually leads the work of our team. We have a meeting with one of our partners next week. We'll be inviting teachers of color to provide feedback about what are the needs of teachers. So the district kind of acting as an intermediary between the IHEs and the actual teaching staff to get that information directly to them about how they can shift their programs to be more responsive to what we need as a district and what our teachers need.
Thank you, Sujan. Can you just define IHG or tell us what those initials stand for?
I'm so sorry. Yeah,
okay.
When I first got to Central, I was like so blown away by the number of acronyms. IHE is the Institute of Higher Education.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to go ahead, Alea?
Yeah, I'm just going to put something in the chat also, but I think this idea of like, know if you're an after school program, right? Understand of your workforce who wants to become teachers. Where are they in their educational career, right? Do they have some college? Do they take a break? Do they have their AA? And like, where are they on their pathway? And let that kind of, help define your vision, right? And where you start in terms of the many points along the journey to become an educator, where you start as a program. And, and Eric, you spoke to this, right? Is like first understanding who your workforce is, what are their goals, how many are you talking about, and then focus some supports there. And Sujan, you spoke to this too, right? Like look at the data. And, in terms of like, then reaching out to partners, you have all of us to help make the case for why these partnerships are important. But just think about, this idea of a teacher who has 4 to 6 years of experience working with young people, right? If we think about 4 to 6 years while they're earning their BA and then earning their credential, might even be longer than that. How rich that experience is. And then it's our job as partners to figure out how we address barriers that could come up within those 4 to 6 years. And again, whether that's creating opportunities for credit for prior learning, or recognizing work experience as clinical hour, like whatever it is, you know, figure out, or that could help bring partners to the table, if we can really like see that common vision. And then just to say, I mean, to have someone working in after school for 4 to 6 years is beyond like the average, you know, tenure of an after school worker. So for this idea, you know, of after school and out of school time programs, you know, who come, you know, have this very real, you know, reaction that we're like recruiting people to get rid of them. You don't have people for 4 to 6 years, right? And so if you can have someone for 4 to 6 years, and you know that you have someone for 4 to 6 years, that's a game changer, right? In terms of how you develop career pathways, you're creating the, you know, the pathways for others to move into that. So yeah, that just comes up as something important to think about.
Yeah, I think to add, when you're setting up your program, is don't underestimate the small stuff before you get into program. Like the fingerprinting, the transcript ordering, the exams. Like Oakland paid for some of that stuff for me. And that was helpful, but it's like, you have to pay a lot of money to be a teacher. Like, it's a lot. And the fact that Oakland had that like all of my CSETs were paid for. Now, granted, I had to take them like 3 times because they're hella hard. So every other time that came from me, but like my principal was like, all right, how can we support you? Like, how can we pay for this? Like, where can we give you time off during testing to study? How can we incorporate this into your coaching? How can we find you an on-site tutor, right? Because the CSETs are hard. And I don't know if that's still a thing, but there's a lot of steps before you actually get into a program that can be barriers for people. And so just make sure you plan for those things. I think Oakland did a great job planning for those. I knew all the steps. I didn't miss a step. I knew I had to do that random constitutional requirement that maybe was covered by a college class, but maybe not, but it was only like $5 to do. Like, they made sure we did it. So just don't forget about the small things, because those things matter a lot. And those things are really big barriers for people. And so planning for them will be essential.
Thank you. Ayo and Catherine, and I'm sure others of you out there in the audience have a lot of interesting things to say. And Ayo, it looks like you're getting ready to do a program or looking at a program. Catherine, it sounds like in Palm Beach you have a program. If you put something in the question and answers, I can open up your mic and invite you to join this conversation. So if you would like to put something in the Q&A box, I can open you up. Oh, look at that. Thank you, Vigay. If you would like to join this conversation. Sounds like there are very many steps. How long did it take you, Vigay, to complete everything?
So I taught on emergency credential for 2 years. I was pretty crazy. I had just had a baby when I started this whole process. So I am a wife and a mom of 3 kids, and I was teaching full time at one of the hardest middle schools in Oakland. So I was studying for CSETs and doing everything. So it took me 2 years to get into a program. And then my program was 2 years. And now I am in the beginning teacher induction program in OUSD to clear my credential. So by the time my credential clears, I have enough teaching experience to be an administrator, which is why I'm functioning in that role now, because I've actually taught so long that I qualified to do that. So by the time I have a clear credential, it'll be 5 years. And I entered this process already having a BA and a master's in education, of which none of my master's credits were counted towards my credentialing program. And I had to retake all the classes that I had already taken before over.
Oof.
So yeah, it was a 5-year process for me with a BA.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions and answer in our question and answer pod. So let me ask you, Sujan, how do you see, if people are interested, well, anybody can answer, but if people are interested in beginning to develop a pathway in their community-based organization or in their after school, or if there are other teachers out there in the audience, how do you suggest people get started looking at a teacher pathway program?
I guess the first thing would be to find out what kind of pathway programs exist with that district already, which is connected to this idea that, you know, the after school to teacher pathway is just one of many that we hold. And so our pathways, what we learn from each of our pathways informs our practices for across the board, which is really useful. And it's a really great way for us to actually share and layer financial support. So someone in the after school pathway might also qualify for funding at the Salesforce grant, for example, or local solutions if you wanted to be a special educator, or you would qualify for the residency program. So the question would be to just, if the school district has a website where it kind of lays out the different pathway programs that they're offering, I would say that would be a good place to start. But of course, you know, where it makes the most sense would be to speak with your principal. Because like Vijay was pointing out, a lot of sites, if they have the wherewithal and the experience, they'll be doing their own recruitment programs, and then they could actually get candidates connected to the district. I feel like there's a larger conversation here about all of the different factors that we've found to be an essential part of pathway development and support. I'm not sure how much time we have, but definitely the funding piece is a part of it. And then one other piece that I would like to name would be having supported pathways. We understand that there are concrete supports that have to do with test prep, such as Vijay was saying, test prep, which is a huge barrier. Although I do want to say that there are options now to use coursework to meet some of those testing requirements. Test prep, also tuition support, financial aid, and getting candidates connected to IHEs, and then providing information about how to get employed in the district, having those credentialing conversations so that, and the employment conversations, so people can actually map out their individual pathways. But then there's this whole intangible piece as well, the social emotional support of a cohort, connecting with people, because most people who are coming through our pathways are not just on a teacher pathway, they are also often parents, as Vijay knows, they're taking care of elderly parents in their home, or they're contending with the madness of all that the pandemic has brought. So there's just so many different factors that there really has to be an intentional scaling, really, of connection and love with everybody who comes through, like a personal connection and relationship building.
Thank you. Anybody else want to say? I mean, Eric, you have mentioned a little bit of what you are starting to do in terms of building out a program. You want to just talk a little bit about the components?
Well, I mean, we honestly, we don't have the components yet. I mean, we're still at the stage where we need to really do some work internally to find out from our own team, what do you need? How much interest is there in this? What do you need? How do we need to build this here? Because I think most everything we've talked about today is pretty universal, but when it comes down to brass tacks, it's got to be adapted to the local environment. I mean, in Los Angeles, you know, geography and transportation are huge factors, right? For staffing, for these kinds of programs, for anything. And so that's just one example of something we need to look at. But what we're planning to do is do some deep dive with our own staff to really find out what is it that they need to hear directly from them. And I want to say thank you to everyone on the panel, because I'm learning so much, and I'm so filled with hope and inspiration around, especially around the the patience and resilience, of really being able to stick with folks and coach them through the whole process, to hear Vigay's journey, through ups and downs, and then, you being able to be there for others. Like, you can be there for them for that process a million times better than I could ever be, because I haven't become a teacher. And I certainly haven't become a teacher in the same context that you're in and that you're then helping others in. So I think that as like a operating principle, that there needs to not just be new structures and supports, but there needs to be almost case managers or whatever the right word is. Maybe that's not the right word, but like concierge, that everybody who's going through this process, they have someone that they can call who's been through it, or at least has been really close to it, works in it, and can really help them navigate through it. Not only what I think about a lot of times, which is the bureaucratic struggle, but more than that. And someone commented on this in the chat too, that social, emotional, and mental health support that you're talking about, Vigay, around let's map out your personal time and all of that. There's more to that than just calendaring and scheduling, right? That's the love that you were talking about, that Sue, that it's like, for people to know that someone cares enough about me and me being successful in this journey, because we're all linked arms in the bigger vision of helping all children succeed, like that can pull someone through like so much adversity, so much disappointment along the way, So I think that we're going to find that we need to incorporate that, and that we can't only look at, the structural stuff, but we've also got to look at the individual human support that's needed for everybody.
Thank you. All right, all you out there, the people that we cannot see, do you have any questions for us? Let's see, something in the question.
It looks like you do actually have a queue in your Q&A.
We got a queue.
Queue in the queue.
Io, can I open up your mic? Would you like to speak? No, I can't open up your mic. Why is that? Hold on. I can. I lied. Io, you are able to speak your question into the room if you'd like to join the conversation.
Okay, I am attending today on behalf of Think Together after school program or extended learning programs. And I just wanted to know, because I heard a lot of talk about going to the principals about these teacher pathway programs, but Think Together is huge. And so to develop a program like this, if we go to one principal, that means we'd have to be going to like 800 principals. So, would you recommend us starting at the district level and maybe going to the liaisons that we already are, in communication with?
So Citizen Schools, which is a really large after school program network as well, when I was a part of that organization, they also set up a teacher pathway program. So I will reach out to them to get some knowledge around the success and failures that they experienced in their program. But they had a relationship with both the district and the universities. And so folks would be in their after school program residency, typically as AmeriCorps fellow, so they can access that grant. And then they would also be enrolled in the credentialing program and connected to jobs through the district. So they had this program in California and other states as well. And so from what I saw, they had a relationship with both the university and the district, and they established them around the same time. But I definitely recommend reaching out to them because they saw a lot of success, but also a lot of failure in those models. And so I think you can get a lot of fruitful information from them.
You said it was called Citizens what?
It's in schools, and they're based
Okay, that's what I thought. And where, sorry?
They're based out of Boston.
Based out of Boston?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
They just got a new CEO who's based out of Los Angeles, Oscar Cruz.
They have
amazing advocate.
Yeah, they have California, Texas. When I was involved, they were in California, Texas, Jersey, North Carolina. So they're national, and so I think they will be able to give you a lot of information.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Io, can I respond as well? Io,
Absolutely.
I would also say that just both at the site level and at the district level, find out who's willing to work with you, because it really depends on how far along that district has come. Sometimes the district, they're just now scrambling, they're just now figuring out, districts are just now figuring out, oh, teacher diversity and sustainable pathways. And so you may not find anyone at the district level. We've had to do a lot of coordinating across different departments. We could not have done this work without the expanded learning department, for example. So I would say sometimes you might actually find school sites that are much more further along and much more progressive and already have principals that already have their eye on teacher recruitment and retention. And you might have school sites where there is so much staffing need at that school site. Like you have a teaching staff that's relatively new, in which case then it may not be as sustainable. So I would say maybe do a mapping thing, like who's actually available at the site level and who's actually available at the district level to start having this conversation. I would just say open all doors.
And by site level, you mean like school site level?
Mhm.
Or, okay.
Yep. I mean, we have school sites where we rarely like have to recruit and because they just have they're like a well-oiled machine. So it really just depends, I would say.
I would also just add that, pilot projects are critical to be able to show success, really give it the attention it needs, work at all the kinks and figure it out. So, Think Together is even bigger than LA's Best, and so I would definitely say that, like, if you work in one district or even one school, it can really work it out. Then you can start to have like talk to like, have this superintendent talk to that superintendent and sing the praises of this or whatever the staff position is that can speak to their peer in another district or another setting and really be able to provide evidence that this is worthwhile and then start to really grow it. That's what we're hoping to do eventually.
Yeah, and I was just thinking also, Io, your principals that are strong partners already and believe in your program and are good partners to the expanded learning program might be the principals to start with, right? If they're already showing a commitment and a valuing of expanded learning that, and then, Sujan, you also brought up like if they are also thinking about, developing pipelines or pathways, it's a good place to start because we, part of our work in exploring the residency was doing a set of activities, assessing, how to choose and select the right site. And it reminded us a lot of how to select and what strong partnership with expanded learning and a school site, all of those principles, right? And like characteristics that we want to see for a strong partnership with the principal with expanded learning were the same kind of principles and characteristics that that support a strong kind of teacher pathway program.
I'm like shaking my head like you guys can see me, when you're on Zoom and you shake your head in agreement. So thank you for all that information.
We can feel it, Io. We can feel your head shaking. Okay, our assistant principal, Vigay, had to step out. Clearly, it looked like some assistant principal issue at the school with a campus situation. I just want to call attention to Maria Drake's comment in chat about starting a teacher pathway in 2015. Maria, can I open up your mic? Would you like to talk about this?
Sure. Hi,
Welcome.
everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. This is so interesting. And in 2015, we actually started a pathway and worked with our local colleges. And our staff actually worked during the morning with teachers and then transitioned into the afternoon and stayed during the expanded learning time. And we have found it to work best, at least when this wasn't a big deal as it is today, that we worked with our partner principals And most of our staff who went into the schools went into the districts where they were serving, which was also a huge highlight for us. What I'm excited about now is it's becoming more formal, and it's going into districts. And we didn't at that time have partners, and it was really hard to get our staff trained in the classes that they needed. So they would sometimes have to leave early from expanded learning to get to a school in order to get it. When we had critical mass, they would come to us. We would have a teacher come to us. Critical mass over the past couple of years has been very hard to create again in the expanded learning field, to get enough of the staff to have a school like San Jose State come out, send somebody over to us, so we still have to send to them. I mean, there are a lot of ways to make this work, and there are, as I think you talked about, Aaliyah, there's a lot of entry points, and so sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years. We've had staff stay for 4 years or 5 years, just to stay while they're finishing up their degree in order to then get into the school districts. So, I just wanted to say, don't discount talking to your local principals. If you've been working in a district, go to your principals. Your principals are the people that need the teachers. And they support you. At least they've supported us in a big way.
Thanks, Maria. Really helpful. Is there anybody else out there who would like to come on mic to talk about either what they're doing or to ask a question? I will pause for 1 second more. All right, well, what I'd like to do is wrap up and ask my panelist for one last piece of advice or inspiration that you would like to offer folks who are looking at this or wanting to be a teacher and are now in the after school. And I'll ask Alea to go first.
Okay. I mean, I think a lot has been said in terms of like reach out to Vigay. How do we lift up Vigay as like a model for the how we need to put our arms around future aspiring educators wherever they are in their pathway. And so I think one of the things I'll leave with and kind of speak to a question that was in the chat is like one of the policies that wasn't specifically done to address the credit or coursework piece, but is a really exciting thing here in California, was that one of the funding streams to support aspiring educators was opened up to be accessed by expanded learning workers. So the classified teacher credentialing program funding previously wasn't available to community-based organization employees. And so you had to be a district staff member, right, to access that funding to support you in earning your BA, to then pursuing a teaching credential. And so the fact that the majority of expanded learning staff here in California are employees of nonprofits or community-based partners meant that access and that funding wasn't available to them. So I think that's, that is one example of a big policy win. And now the work is, if you are an aspiring educator, make sure you ask about, ask your district or figure out how to access that funding. And then also, if you're a program, know that you have lots of models. You have a strong model with Sujan and Vigay in Oakland. I'm going to volunteer Eric or myself to even share more of our learnings and what we've been exploring in terms of other models to start with.
Eric, thanks, Alea. Eric?
I would just say that I want to encourage everyone to think about this work as just one strand in a much larger fabric, and that can be a strength. because we really need to link arms with others who are fighting for, affordable housing, because that's part of this, increasing salaries for both formal educators and expanded learning, all of the other conditions that need to change in order for it to be possible to dedicate your life to, helping children and not have to make a vow of poverty in order to do it, and make it feasible for people to not come from wealth and still be able to provide for themselves and their families through a career like this. And that's not just about teacher pathways from expanded learning to the classroom. That's one piece of it. But like, if, I heard you mention affordable housing, Sujan, in your opening remarks, and like, I love what you said about this is anti-gentrification work, because I'd never thought about it in that framework. But it really is, it's all part of of a larger movement. And if we deny that and we try to sort of just focus on this kind of thing in a silo, it's just not effective, because we lose a bunch of advocacy partners. Like when we go up to Sacramento to advocate for expanded learning, we make every effort to not only be expanded learning folks who are there. We try to bring folks from the corporate world, from city government, from social work, from law enforcement, despite the fraudness of that, from all kinds of different areas, so that the policymakers can look and say, oh, this is not an issue of an industry trying to protect itself. This is an issue of a community trying to empower its children, and that when we don't have that solidarity and we don't see that there's connections between all of these different activities and efforts, we weaken our own efforts as well. So that's what I want to sort of leave you with or close with, is a request to think about it in those broad terms, so that we can then make changes that will really be lasting.
Thank you, Eric. Sujan?
This has been such a great experience being part of this gathering, because it really has been about, I feel like so many of us maybe have these ideas in our particular context, and we're holding these ideas in silos, but actually having a venue like this to actually have this conversation, I'm leaving here with a sense of just more conversation needs to be had. My own ideas, our own ideas that we've had have become solidified through this process, and so much more that needs to be explored have been highlighted. So I'm excited about the partnerships. I love the holistic framing that we're taking towards this. Also really excited, we have a really strong classified to teacher pathway program, and excited about expanding that to include after school program employees, because to date, we've largely been funded by foundation grants, which are coming to an end. So I'm hoping that the state as a whole is making a shift towards really identifying base funding for this type of work. It just can't be an ad hoc, identification of funds. That has to be really part of sustained funding moving forward for years and years and years to come. So I'm looking forward to just continued conversation around this and idea sharing, because no district or group should do this alone.
Thank you. And as I sat here and listened to everything, I'm struck once again that it comes through our experience that we come here to say that people need to be supported holistically, which is something that we're also advocating in the out of school time world, and hopefully in education, is that young people need to be treated holistically. Staff and teachers who work with young people need to be treated holistically. So the big message I'm taking away is that all along our developmental life, we need to be supported holistically. And we're saying it again over and over. We'll say it till it happens. Deep appreciation for the work that you're doing and for sharing your wisdom here. I just want to let everybody know that this recording will be put on our YouTube channel. and we are happy to send out the slides to you. And really, it was very generous that you all gave your contact information out today. And thank you for sharing the resources, Alea. We also have a briefing paper on after school as teacher pathway that can be found on the Temescal website. And we will be seeing you at our next webinar, which is coming up in January. Thank you very much. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Really
Have a
appreciate
great
it.
day.
Thank you.
Take care.